In this module, we are discussing the way that ideas of nature have played an important part in the way Americans understand themselves. We will begin our discussion dealing with some of the perceptions of nature expressed by early European colonists in America, such as the Pilgrims and the Puritans. The Pilgrims and the Puritans had diverse views, but we do see in their writings a tendency to see the wilderness as a fearful, godless, wild, and even wicked threat. We might contrast this perspective with some of the ideas we discussed previously with the Native American tribe, the Lakota. You will remember that according to the Lakota creation story, nature was created by benevolent principles with the help of God, and to this day, God indwells or lives within nature. The Pilgrims and the Puritans followed the Christian tradition. As we discussed, according to this tradition, the world was originally a wonderful garden created by God. But after Adam and Eve sinned, they were kicked out of that garden. Both humans and nature were cursed as a result of the disobedience of the first human beings. The land was cursed to be dry and barren, and humans were cursed to live outside of that garden and to work that barren land. As Christianity develops, so does the notion of original sin. According to the belief of original sin, human beings are born already evil, even before they make the first bad choices that they will inevitably make. So by simply understanding the origin story of the Christian tradition, we see that we have reason for thinking that both nature and humans have already been contaminated by sin. The origin story of the Garden of Eden takes us into an unknown prehistorical period. When we meet with Abraham, an important founding figure of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, our story takes us back some 4,000 years. Abraham was following God to found a new and godly nation. We see his people dying in a harsh desert as they search for a new land. As we follow the Christian story, we find a partial redemption in the form of Jesus Christ. According to Christianity, those who follow Christ can cast off their original sin and become pure and godly with the help of God. But we called this a partial redemption. That is because human nature is redeemed for those who follow Christ, but nature itself was not redeemed. In fact, nature will only be fully redeemed after the earth itself is destroyed, when God returns at the end of the world. As our story progresses, we meet with the Puritans and the Pilgrims some 400 years back in history. The Pilgrims and the Puritans experienced many threats. One of these was a very apparent physical threat. Disease, animals, the threat of getting lost, and displaced natives were all a very real and physical threat. But they also perceived a spiritual threat in the wilds of the New World. When they encountered nature in its wild and untamed state, they tended to associate that nature with fallen and cursed nature. When the world exists in its natural state, it is also in its unredeemed state. they expressed similar conceptions of the Native Americans, inhabitants of the New World. Because the natives had never been exposed to civilization or to Christianity, they were often viewed as the epitome of humans in their cursed state. As a result, they were frequently depicted as humans given over completely to sin, or even caught in the grip of Satan, God's traditional archenemy. The following excerpt comes from one of the founders of Plymouth Plantation. Plymouth Plantation was an early American colony founded by the Pilgrims. William Bradford, History of Plymouth Plantation, from 1651. William Bradford, History of Plymouth Plantation, from 1651. In this section, William Bradford describes the feeling of the colonists as they first reached the new land. Being thus arrived in a good harbor and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean, and delivered them from all the perils and all the miseries thereof, again to set their feet on the firm and stable earth, their proper element. They had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses or much less towns to repair to seek for succor. These savage barbarians, when they met with them, as after will appear, were readier to fill their sides full of arrows than otherwise. Besides, what could they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness full of wild beasts and wild men? They could have little solace or content in respect of any outward objects. For summer being done, all things stand upon them with a weather-beaten face, and the whole country, full of woods and thickets, represented a wild and savage hue. What could now sustain them but the Spirit of God and His grace? May not and ought not the children of these fathers rightly say, when they wandered in the desert wilderness, out of the way, and found no city to dwell in, both hungry and thirsty, their soul was overwhelmed in them. Let them confess before the Lord His loving kindness and His wonderful works before the sons of men. Hopefully, you can easily see in this short reading the sense in which William Bradford had a fear of what he calls wild nature and wild men. You may have also noticed a comparison of the wanderings of Abraham in the desert wilderness and the journey that these Christian sojourners took on their way to their own idea of the promised land. Of course, in spite of these fears and perceptions, the wild lands would not be avoided. The wilds were entered for hunting, for natural resources, for cattle ranching, for family farms, for the search of religious freedom, and for many other reasons. This concludes our discussion of nature from the point of view of the Pilgrims and the Puritans.